What are the key injuries you need to know going into the Week 8 fantasy football matchups there for Sunday and Monday games? And what do we make of DFS this week? And who should you be targeting on FanDuel cash games, DraftKings tournaments, and your prize picks of the week? Time to break it down right here. Plus, Thursday night football reaction only on the Friday edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Our Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer, and I'm not doing this. I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. Come to the site now. Check out all the good stuff we have there leading you into Week 8. Pick straight up, pick against the spread as well. We did start off with some pretty good results here in that vein here with our Thursday night game. It was a little disappointing, however, for our fantasy football principles here, and that's on both sides for the Buccaneers and the Ravens there. So we will provide some of that reaction from what we saw on Thursday night. Between those two teams, Lamar Jackson, a very solid game here passing, which we were looking for him to get going again. So that happened definitely as the Ravens beat the Buccaneers there 27-22. So interesting matchup for sure, and more points than we thought in fantasy, but to different players than expected here. So we will break that down for you on the show really quick. Then we'll look at our injury update. Big one comes there for Monday night with Jamar Chase ruled out for multiple weeks here with a hip injury. He could land on injured reserve. I think right now the target is for that Chiefs game in a few weeks here. They do have a bye coming up in a couple weeks. They do have to play the Browns and Panthers before then, and they play the Steelers and Titans, and then they get the Chiefs. So we will break that down for you with our injury updates. That's the biggest one of the week. Then we'll look at the cash game targets there for FanDuel, our DraftKings tournaments picks, and then our prize picks of the week. We'll close with that here on Locked On Fantasy Football. So quick reaction to what we saw with the Buccaneers-Ravens. Tom Brady, let's start with the disappointing side. Leonard Fournette doesn't get in the end zone. Tom Brady goes for more than 300 yards, gets a late garbage touchdown to Julio Jones. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin had pretty good nights here with high target volume, but the running game continues to sputter. He got lucky with the Fournette touchdown, but that's what he's been doing this season. His biggest value has been catching passes and scoring, and that's what definitely came to fruition here as an RB2 for the Buccaneers. And really, Tom Brady, this is his best game in a long time. So 301. It's not great. We didn't recommend playing him this week. If you did have to play him just based on situations, it wasn't terrible. It could have been a lot worse here. It could have been a lot better had they got another touchdown. And there were opportunities to do that. There were some penalties there that called back some scores. Cade Otton, we were looking for that big breakout game from the rookie tight end. Unfortunately, a couple scoring opportunities went by the wayside, called back with penalties there. So frustrating night again for the Buccaneers offense. They produced a few more points, but not exactly that fantasy ceiling we're looking for from that team, especially against the Ravens defense. They've been playing better of late with their zone coverage looks and not going one-on-one and doing zero coverage, the blitz that they usually have in their scheme. So they've adjusted pretty well on the fly here. So let's contain passing games. Overall, we knew that was going to be the result. It was going to be zone system. They were going to dare the Buccaneers to run effectively. That didn't happen. So a lot of Chris Godwin underneath, a lot of Mike Evans underneath. Not enough of the tight end, especially with Russell Gage down. Julio Jones did play and score, which was the biggest shocker of shockers, that he not only suited up, but he also was there at the end to catch that garbage touchdown late from Tom Brady. Now, from Lamar Jackson's standpoint, didn't do a ton of running. They came up throwing, maybe trying to get eager and exploit those injuries that they had in the secondary. You had no Carlton Davis. You had no Sean Murphy-Bunting. Also, the Antoine Winfield Jr. was not playing. So you had some really inexperienced corners. But then that plan blew up very quickly. Mark Andrews landed awkwardly on the shoulder. He was involved for the first two catches of the game. And then he got hurt and then disappeared, and he was done. Rashad Bateman had that full practice on Wednesday, had the foot injury, but then he aggravated it. He was out, so not even a catch for him while he was in there. So it became the Isaiah Likely and Devin Duvernay show, and Kenny Drake also with Gus Edwards. He was questionable with a knee injury. He comes out with a new injury with a hamstring. So really terrible injury luck for Edwards and Andrews. They were headed for a big, big night here, given how well the Ravens threw the tight end and ran the ball against the Buccaneers. Two things that in the past the Buccaneers were really contained, but the Ravens really had their way there. So instead of those two guys having the big benefits, it was instead Isaiah Likely, the rookie tight end from Coastal Carolina. He seamlessly became Mark Andrews and played like that handcuff we thought, that high-end rookie handcuff we had for a tight end, which is rare, but there was a plug and play, and it was the Isaiah Likely show. Real was helped by Bateman not being a factor. Then Duvernay took over. He scored on a rushing attempt. He was locked in with Lamar Jackson. You also had a nice game from Kenyon Drake with a touchdown reception there. So it was all about hopefully Andrews, Bateman, and Edwards. It became about Likely and Duvernay and Drake. So basically the backups just came through. So good job of scheming by the Ravens. They have the nice game from those guys. A lot of those guys did a lot of damage in no lineups this week. So if you got lucky and you just went a backup oriented lineup, anticipating the injuries there, and wanted to just roll it in that single game slate, you really paid off handsomely. You were alone in doing that probably. So congratulations on that. But Lamar Jackson, the main thing was tying him into all that. He had a great game for not running big time. And I thought he was going to run a lot more. But again, they came out throwing. Lamar got comfortable eventually in the second half once they got that running game going. So overall, the injuries were a bummer. I think the diagnosis initially from John Harbaugh is the fact that these are not going to be major, but they do have to play on Monday night. They're in week 9 against the Saints. So we'll see if all those guys are ready to play. If not, we know who the backup plans are as we saw them in full force. So Isaiah Likely, I think, going forward, once the Ravens are past their bye and you don't want to mess with tight end and don't want a different backup tight end, just keep Isaiah Likely on your bench for Mark Andrews there as your insurance policy. It's cheap. And well, now maybe got a little bit more expensive. Is there's going to be people that chase points and hope that Likely is the guy next week. But if Andrews and Bateman are at full strength here, I don't see him having as big a role nearly here. And they really threw to James Ferochet, and he wasn't a makeup for Bateman. So Likely kind of best of both worlds, making up for both Andrews and Bateman in that game. All right, let's go through the other injuries here. These are the injuries that are going into week 8, not coming out of week 8. Let's look at Russell Wilson. They're playing in London against the Jaguars. He should return. Remember, he was doing all of that working out on the plane, so he should be good to go, right? But hamstring, he expects to play. We'll follow that. We'll know very early, so there's no question about that. And I don't know if you want to play him anyway against the Jaguars defense. You're not going to play Aaron Rodgers. I don't think if you can avoid it against that Bills defense. They're on the road on Sunday night, but he's got a right thumb injury playing through that. We know Matt Ryan battling through right shoulder injury. He may not have been healthy enough to play anyway, but Sam Elger is taking over for the duration of the season. Derek Carr battling a bit of back issue there for the Raiders, but he's upgraded to full, which is a good sign for that Saints game. He will be the starter, of course. The other side of things, Jameis Winston, back and ankle, he's going full, but Andy Dalton is going to start. So it's Dalton versus Carr in that game. In between, we skipped from Las Vegas to New Orleans, Miami. No questions with Tua Tagovailoa. He had a left hand issue, but he's going to be good to go for that smash matchup against the Lions in Detroit. Ryan Tannehill didn't look good after the game. He played through it against the Colts last week with the ankle injury. He had the walking boot. He didn't feel all that great, but now limited practice there on Thursday suggests that he should suit up and start against the Texans instead of the rookie Malik Willis from Liberty. Taylor Heinicke has a calf injury, but practicing in full, he's starting there for the Commanders against the Colts. And no Sam Howell quite yet for the Commanders. We'll see if Heinicke keeps up his good play after beating the Packers last week. James Conner is trending in the right direction. We'd like to see him get a little bit more work and practice here with the ribs injury. And if that's the case, then Eno Benjamin, Keontae Ingram, their values disappear here in that matchup for the Cardinals in Minnesota. Caleb Huntley has an illness for the Falcons. I think it's going to be more of Tyler Algier. It's not a bad matchup at home against the Panthers this week. So we'll be seeing a lot of Algier and as well as Donta Foreman running the ball because Chuba Hubbard, we thought he was fine with the ankle injury late against the Buccaneers, but 2 missed practices, and that's not a good sign. Donta Foreman could have a big, big feature role. So look out for Algier and Foreman to really be productive in that game. One guy that's going to absolutely smash this week is Tony Pollard. Ezekiel Elliott, we talked about him with the knee injury. He was a little bit late to the consideration there on Wednesday. So, yeah, Ezekiel Elliott probably going to miss the game. I know he wants to play probably because he knows Pollard is going to go off against the Bears. So Pollard is going to be great this week. DeAndre Swift is going to return here. Ankle, shoulder injuries, 2 full practices. We'd say it's not going to be a surprise inactive like it was in Dallas last week. Josh Jacobs playing through foot injury, but he can keep rolling. He's a elite fantasy RB1 this season, so he'll get it done against the Saints for you. Rams, Darrell Anderson Jr. battling through an illness. He's going to probably see the majority of the work. We'll see if they activate the rookie Kyron Williams out of Notre Dame from injured reserve for that game. But right now, Darrell Anderson in line to get the most of the work against the 49ers, but I think it's going to be more about the passing game this week. That's where you can attack San Francisco at this particular time and not in their run defense. Raheem Mostert has the knee injury, but he's good to go here for sure. And a great matchup against the Lions. We love him in DFS. We'll talk about that in our next segment there with FanDuel and DraftKings. Kyle Juszczyk is out for the 49ers. He's got a finger injury, which isn't significant because that means Christian McCaffrey might get a couple more receptions because Juszczyk gets in those plays. Juszczyk, as he's known, they're on his social media platforms. He's a very athletic guy out of fullback. He's a unique player, so it gives up more opportunities for McCaffrey, especially if Deebo Samuel is also out or limited this week. Laviska Shenault is going to play through his hamstring injury. We talked about Jamar Chase being out with his hip injury against the Browns. You also have Stanley Morgan. He's a deep guy in the roster that you have to start thinking about now with the hamstring. He's also missing practice. So Mike Thomas, not the other Mike Thomas that plays in New Orleans. The 2 Mike Thomases were in the same game a couple of weeks ago. But when you look at it, Mike Thomas would see the reps on the outside, but that would only mean a bump up in targets for T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd there. Boyd working the slot, Thomas being your outside 3 then, and then T. Higgins stepping into that number 1 role. Denzel Ward, by the way, battling concussion, so that could open things up for that big game from T. Higgins as Joe Burrow makes the pivot there back to his original receiver that was drafted with him. David Bell, he's technically a Brown starter. You wouldn't know it by his usage. He's limited with an ankle injury. Amari Cooper is going to be good to go. I don't love the matchup against Chidobe Awuzie. We talked about that. Noah Brown, 2 missed practices for the Cowboys with a foot injury, so that could give a little bit more run for CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup against the Bears this week. I think of the 2, I think Gallup has it harder with Jalen Johnson. Well, I think CeeDee Lamb can move in the slot into that favorable matchup with the rookie Kyler Gordon when needed this week. Amon-Ra St. Brown is in the concussion protocol. This is different from having a concussion. 2 limited practices. We'll see if he gets that clarity from the designation, maybe get a full practice on Friday there, but should be cleared for the Dolphins, so we expect that. Josh Reynolds should also play it through his knee injury after getting limited practice there on Thursday. Allen Lazard, he said he's not playing. So usually receivers want to just say, okay, I'm going to play. You can count on me out there. But Allen Lazard checked out of the game last week with the shoulder where they could have used him. He was out in street clothes on the sideline. That wasn't a good sign at all. We didn't expect him to play. He's not. It looks like that. So make plans for Allen Lazard. We'll see. We got Christian Watson, the hamstring injury. Sammy Watkins also has a hamstring injury. So it might have to, by necessity, get Romeo Doubs more involved there in that matchup against the Bills. But tough matchup this week. Try to avoid it and pivot if you can. Nico Collins, I wonder if they're going to put him on injured reserve, but as a growing injury, I really liked his upside last week, but then guess what happened? He got hurt. Philip Dorsett got the touchdown. It was very frustrating there to see Dorsett get Collins' numbers when it was a good call, good matchup, but yeah, Nico Collins probably not going to be available, and maybe droppable in leagues if you're dealing with some bye week issues. Jamal Agnew is the only player on the Jaguars injury report for London just even named. The knee injury, we'll see if he goes, but gives another weapon for Trevor Lawrence if that's the case. illness there for one Devontae Adams, but he should be good to go here for the Raiders against the Saints. Hunter Renfrow is going to play through his hip injury. Mac Hollins should play again through the heel injury. I wonder if they're going to get some more depth at wide receiver there in Las Vegas before the trade deadline. Kendrick Bourne having the connection with Josh McDaniels from New England looks like a good target for them to improve the weaponry for Derek Carr. Jalen Waddle should be healthier, continue to be healthier with that shoulder injury. Great spot along with Tyreek Hill against the Lions in Detroit this week. Nelson Aguilar, he's just been an afterthought in this offense quite a bit without McDaniels. They're in New England, hamstring injury, maybe missing. Speaking of Bourne, also on this report with a toe injury. The other Michael Thomas, foot injury, didn't practice. Jarvis Landry, ankle, didn't practice. Come on, guys. These guys are just unreliable. Seems like they're disinterested to play unless the quarterback is Jameis Winston. So absolutely not here. But Chris Olave, great spot. Traquan Smith, a bit of a sleeper this week based on the coverage against the Raiders. So remember, no Nate Hobbs, that really good slot corner for the Raiders, is not playing. So really open things up here. So Traquan should be your number two, and he's had decent chemistry so far in the first two games there with Andy Dalton. Kenny Galladay, there's no more of Kadarius Toney, so it's all about Kenny Galladay is the guy not practicing and playing for the Giants for the Seahawks game. Corey Davis probably going to miss the game as well for the Jets. Keep an eye on Elijah Moore this week, folks. I think with no Corey Davis, Elijah Moore maybe reminding this coaching staff that you need to get him the ball, put him back in the fold happily. He's also their best short catch option here. And could see work in the slot there. We talked about that Miles Bryant matchup, but that could be really good for Elijah Moore as a squeaky wheel this week. Deebo Samuel, that hamstring injury is definitely concerning. He's listed day to day, but 2 missed practices. We know he can play with very little practice work, so let's hope that's the case because he smashes the Rams. DK Metcalf, probably not going to play. He's saying he might with a knee injury, but I don't see that happening there against the Giants this week. Tyler Lockett should be good to go with the hamstring injury, full practice for him. You have Jahan Dotson having a hamstring. I mean, he's probably going to miss the game for the Commanders, 2 missed practices. We might see Diami Brown back there, however, with the growing injury return in that game against Indianapolis. Hayden Hurst, growing an ankle injury, he'll keep playing against the Browns. David Njoku, high ankle sprain. He's not going to play against the Bengals. They also could be without tight end Pharaoh Brown, which is big because that'll help Harrison Bryant, who has a thumb injury, but will play through that here in that matchup against Cincinnati, which is pretty decent. Dalton Schultz, 2 limited practices, should be fine here for the Bears matchup as he really got some run last week with Dak Prescott. TJ Hawkinson, knee injury for him, but he should be good to go. He plays through these type of little minor injuries every week. Darren Waller's a hamstring, and he has a chance to return 2 limited practices this week. All of a sudden, you had Juwan Johnson get hurt for the Saints. Adam Troutman already looking like he'll miss another game. So, again, by the numbers, it's not bad for the tight end, and it could be Juwan Johnson if he can go through that hamstring with Troutman out. But keep in mind, Taysom Hill also in a good spot because the Raiders give up plenty against the run there as well. In that non-traditional tight end, I think Taysom can deliver. Daniel Bellinger not going to be out there for the Giants. Chris Myarick is now your starter in a decent matchup against the Seahawks. It's really a deep threat, deep play, I would say. Not deep threat, but in terms of digging deep, you can look at Chris Myarick, given he got a lot of targets last week when Bellinger went out. Pat Freiermuth there with an ankle injury, he is good to go here playing against the Eagles. He might actually see a few targets here because the Eagles are so good in the secondary, especially at corner with Darius Slay. And James Bradbury could open things up against the safety and linebackers for Freiermuth. Logan Thomas, calf injury, 2 limited practices he can return. They need him because Cole Turner, their rookie tight end that they like, has a concussion and probably going to miss that game. Now, more notable injuries that we're looking at, Wyatt Teller, the Browns offensive lineman, probably going to miss the game. The Cardinals offensive line really banged up there going into Minnesota, but they still be fine. I mean, their offensive line isn't that great. David Bakhtiari, that's a big one here as he's struggling to stay healthy. His replacement, Zach Tom, actually played pretty well. Their offensive line actually was not the issue last week against the Commanders, but Bakhtiari being there would be a little bit better. Dolphins have 3 injuries there, Taron Armstead and a couple other players. Patriots, David Andrews, their fine center, may not play. That could hurt the run blocking here. The Giants have also 2 interior questions, really 1 interior question. With Ben Bredesen, their starting left guard, and Evan Neal, both knee injuries here, could miss the game. So those are the ones that affected there on the offensive line. Defensively, we'll see if Trey Hendrickson can go. That definitely help the Browns a little bit if he's not in the pass rush and disrupting the running game. The Giants are already down up front. Azeez Ojulari, Leonard Williams trying to play through an elbow injury this week. The 49ers probably going to have Eric Armstead miss another game this week, so that's not good. But Samson Ekubom should be good to go to play opposite Nick Bosa in that pass rush and get going. The Colts not going to have Kwity Paye probably, so that opens things up. We'll see about Shaquille Leonard returning at linebacker this week. Jeffrey Simmons, this is a sneaky one that would help Dameon Pierce. Two missed practices for the Titans. He's their best defensive lineman, one of the best in the league here, the ankle injury. So that could open things up for sure in Dameon Pierce situation. We have the rest here. Micah Parsons, we'll watch that one. He should go. Rashawn Gary is another one. He can play the concussion. Shaquille Leonard gets these full practices in, doesn't play. We'll see if that changes this week. Darrell Taylor is a pretty good player for the Seahawks. He might be missing the Giants game. Dre Greenlaw is definitely a good player for the 49ers. Might miss the Rams game. That could help with their running game and short passing game in that one. And at corner, a big one is in Atlanta, A.J. Terrell, the hamstring injury, and their safety, Jared Hawkins. This is important here as they can work the middle of the field and outside with DJ Moore. This week, we talked about Denzel Ward being potentially out to help T. Higgins in that matchup without any Jamar Chase for a while. Kyle Duggar, this is an interesting one. Not that you'd rush and play Tyler Conklin, but it opens it up. And if Corey Davis missed the game, no Duggar means the Patriots are not as good against the tight end. So he's been an afterthought. That is Conklin for weeks here. So that has happened with the Zach Wilson effect, but Duggar definitely is a key guy against tight end. So that would change things here. David Howard still banged up, re-banged up with that growing injury here. So that is good news when Amon-Ra St. Brown works inside. They're pretty fit in the secondary. Marshawn Lattimore, their abdomen injury. So that's great for Devontae Adams that you'll probably see Paulson Adebo, who's also battling a knee injury. So there you have the key injuries affecting fantasy football. So we had to go a little bit longer here this week on this first segment, but we wanted to bring you the information and news and nuggets you need to know for this week beyond just our fantasy football skill players. But big blow there with Jamar Chase. But again, Tyler Boyd looking good more as a wide receiver 2, and T. Higgins bumps up even more as a wide receiver 1 going forward. All right. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is sponsored by Simply Safe Home Security with Fast Protect technology exclusive from Simply Safe 24/7 monitoring agents to capture evidence accurately, verify a threat for faster police response. There's no safe like Simply Safe. Visit simplysafe.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more. Here's a sports analogy for you. When it comes to burglars, your home is like the end zone. You need the absolute strongest defense you can muster. This is why I use and trust Simply Safe Home Security. At Simply Safe, your safety is the only thing that matters. It is cutting-edge technology powered by 24/7 professional monitoring agents who always have your back, so you know that your home is safe. They're always there for you, and I feel like their support staff is fantastic, whether the team making sure that they're monitoring your house well as agents or the tech support staff. They're going to take care of you there at Simply Safe to feel secure also about having the backup plans with the Simply Safe monitoring. Their agents are going to call you the moment a threat is detected, dispatch police or first responders emergency, even if you're not home and can't be reached. The monitoring experts at Simply Safe use proprietary advanced response technology to visually confirm when a break-in is real, so you get the highest priority police dispatch. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplysafe.com/LockedOnNFL. Save 20% on your Simply Safe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month free. Visit simplysafe.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more. There's no safe like Simply Safe. All right, thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. For your second listen today, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with the local experts insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, right here, if you're watching us here, and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, we got through our comprehensive injury report, a little bit exhausted there. It is middle of the season. We're almost at the halfway point. If we go halfway through week 8, we'll be almost there. Week 9 almost here as well. So can't believe it. We're already halfway through the fantasy football regular season. So if we're struggling a little bit with our season-long leagues and we want to dive a little bit more into DFS and take advantage of the data points, so here's some advice for that. So let's look at FanDuel cash games and DraftKings tournaments, players that I'm targeting this week. For cash games, I'm going to start with Kirk Cousins here. I like that price point at 7,800. I love the matchup. He lit up the Cardinals last year for a massive game. Justin Jefferson in a good spot as well. But 7,800 here for Kirk Cousins is a good deal on FanDuel. I think it makes sense to go after him. I think he'll have some decent ownership here based on the matchup. I think you'll also see people jump on Tua Tagovailoa in that matchup as well against the Lions. So I think those guys will have a pretty good share of the ownership at quarterback this week. It makes a lot of sense, and you'll see some pivots to some other players this week. But definitely without Patrick Mahomes or Justin Herbert, these guys really get elevated. You also don't have Josh Allen, who's on Sunday Night Football, so he's not on the main slate. So we're going to have to look for the best values. I think Derek Carr would also have some value there in that game against the Saints. The Saints' pass defense really struggling, but I like Kirk Cousins there. He's my cash games pick at 7,800. For my tournament pick, this game is sneaky. I think the Commanders Colts will have more points. We've talked about this, as well as the Rams 49ers. So those are some games to target where I think there's going to be some luster off. People have bad taste in their mouth still from the Rams offense from before the bye. And the 49ers are going to think it's a low scoring game. So those are games to target. So you can look at Jimmy Garoppolo and Matthew Stafford. I would think I would be a little bit more interested in Stafford in that one if I'm going there for a little contrarian play. And I think, again, coming off the bye, I think this Rams offense will be better run. I like Taylor Heinicke at 5,200 there. He's cheaper than those guys, has a very good value there, and he's going to put the ball up. I think he can get a good return on that investment. The Colts, I think, will put up points with Sam Ehlinger with the running game and passing game on the Commanders. It's on the road. It's in contained environment in the dome. So Heinicke, I think, puts up numbers 5,200 DraftKings. I like him in the tournament format this week. If you want to pay up for Derrick Henry, by all means, do it this week. He's 10,000. That's the top of the heap here. And I know why, because they're playing Texans, the worst run defense in the NFL that just gave up a massive 3-touchdown game on the ground at Josh Jacobs and the Raiders last week. So Henry is not going to disappoint. It is going to cost you quite a bit again at 10,000, but there are some good value running backs to play off that this week, including Raheem Mostert at 6,800, Tony Pollard 6,800, right in that same price range, Donta Foreman. So I think that's how you balance it out if you go for a big, heavy hitter at running back this week. And Derrick Henry, if you're going to pay up, you're going to get that return. You can definitely get those 30 points back there in a tournament style, or definitely get 25 points there. Because I think there's an opportunity for Derrick Henry to have multiple touchdowns. If that's the case, if you're looking at that, you're definitely going to get the return on investment. Jonathan Taylor might be your little bit of an alternative at $1,700 cheaper there on FanDuel at 8,300. Jonathan Taylor, someone to watch for sure, because again, they need to get him going. That's part of, I think, starting Ehlinger, the more mobile quarterback, to play off the run a little bit better. So Taylor would not surprise me if he went off against the Commanders there this week to get back on track, his first big game since week one. Raheem Mostert, the prices are just really good here for him, 6,800, 5,900. Lines can be run all over. We saw what Ezekiel and Tony Pollard did to them last week. So good spot there. And speaking of Pollard, 6,800, 6,100, those prices are awesome. Obviously, those prices were made before we were sure Ezekiel Elliott is out, but you got to take advantage of them. And you know there's going to be a high ownership. And again, if you want to pivot, look at Raheem Mostert there as an option. Donta Foreman's also going to get heavy usage should Chuba Hubbard miss the game. But I think Pollard might be a necessity here because I think he's going to go off. You want to make sure you have that in your lineup. You could also go for the last week version of Pollard, Ramondre Stevenson there against the Jets, if that's your pivot for either FanDuel or DraftKings this week on the main slate. Let's go to wide receiver. And Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill are two guys I really would like in my life. I go with Jefferson at 9,000. At secondary, Marco Wilson, Byron Murphy Jr., a little bit better coverage there overall because of some zone concepts. But I do really like Jefferson off the bye to get going. I love these receivers off the bye. You have quite a bit there. Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs, A.J. Brown, any of those guys would be great. But I think the best matchup by far goes to Justin Jefferson. You have Tyreek Hill again against that really bad line secondary. So that's the main guy, one of those main guys I'd like to have in my lineup. You look at DJ Moore. I love the price point at 6,200 on FanDuel. He's a good tournament play also at DraftKings 5,300. So he's a guy that has that decent volume. It's going to happen again with PJ Walker, the Falcons secondary. We talked about it. No AJ Terrell, no Casey Hayward. They're pretty beat up there overall. I don't think that Isaiah Oliver is going to contain them all that much. So DJ Moore in a really good spot. Cash games or tournaments this week. 6,200 on FanDuel, 5,300 DraftKings. Chris Olave at 6,900. He has a decent chemistry, as we've talked about with Andy Dalton for their games and hookups. He had the big game last week against the Cardinals. So before that, the concussion, had the long touchdown from Andy Dalton. So I love that price there. So Jefferson, DJ Moore, Chris Olave, some players I really like. I also like Michael Pittman Jr. at 7,200. Everyone seems to be just fading the Colts. I wouldn't even mind exploring Alec Pierce here. Ellinger does have a big arm to spread the ball and push it downfield a little bit. So I do like Michael Pittman. As a bit of contrarian. You have to pay up to get him, however, at 7,200. At a cheaper price point, I like Tyler Lockett, especially if DK Metcalf is out. I think you'll see a bit of D. Eskridge and Marquise Goodwin on the outside. But this Giants team has really been hurt in the slot. We saw Christian Kirk have a nice game against them last week. So for that price, 6,500, I think you can get what you're looking for in cash games from Tyler Lockett. Zach Ertz, we always are going to highlight at tight end. We don't have Mark Andrews. We know he played Thursday night. Travis Kelce's off, so we have to go a little bit deeper. We're not going to go George Kittle against the Rams. So we're going to Zach Ertz, 6,000 on FanDuel, 5,100 DraftKings. Good prices here for the Cardinals tight end. I know it was the DeAndre Hopkins show, but part of the reason Ertz didn't get open, he did get a shot there in the end zone, was the fact that it was a very good Saints kind of coverage scheme there to take out the tight end. That's been the case all season long. Vikings are one of the worst teams covering the tight end. So DeAndre Hopkins, the attention he gets from Patrick Peterson and or Cameron Dantzler is going to open things up for Zach Ertz. So I like that. 6,000 and 5,100. I think you can get 60 yards on a touch easily from Ertz this week. And in defense, you can look at the Dolphins at 4,000 against the Lions. They're going to go on the road. They're going to create some mistakes. There, you might see some Dolphins fans make the trip up to Ford Field. Anyway, the Dolphins are very effective defense where they can get after it here. I think Jared Goff might definitely make some critical mistakes in this one. So good price for him, or them, I should say, as a unit. For the Panthers, they're valuable on DraftKings at 2,800. I could even play them on FanDuel. They're playing Marcus Mariota and the Falcons. It's a very tough matchup, I think, for the Falcons beyond the running game. So if they have to put the ball up here, there's going to be some chances for sacks and takeaways against Carolina's defense. Again, a lot of playmakers, J.C. Horn and company, that they have an opportunity to really help you in DFS. There you have it. Those are your picks for FanDuel and DraftKings. Players that you definitely want to consider getting in your lineups here this week. And we will close looking at the prize picks of the week. So we'll explore 5 of those projected totals that we want to exploit and go after there on prizepicks.com. Now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. Sometimes I can get stuck focusing on problems instead of solutions, and you just have to reset your mind. Just like when you're doing a puzzle and you want to take a break a little bit, and you come back to it, and all of a sudden the pieces all seem to come together for you. Well, sometimes we need someone to help us put those pieces back together. You need to train your brain to stay in problem-solving mode when faced with a challenge in life. A therapist can help you become a better problem solver. It definitely has worked for me, seeing a therapist on the regular. It makes it easier to accomplish your goals no matter how big or small. It was easy why I was inspired to seek out therapy. I just wanted to have a little bit more control with those problems and solve them in my life and get some assistance there. The benefits have been great. I feel better and I think better every day with therapy as a important part of my life. If you're thinking of giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is a great option. It's convenient, accessible, affordable, and entirely online. Get matched with a therapist after filling out a brief survey and switch therapists at any time. When you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today. Get 10% off your month's help. That is BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, BetterHelp. Check it out, betterhelp.com. Get 10% off your first month from Locked On. All right, let us continue the show here on Locked On Fantasy Football. here, and let's finish it here strong. Looking at our prize picks of the week. So get in on prize picks there. It is a great exercise there to look at these point totals and really see what you can go for with these yardages and those type of numbers here that you can attack. And we're like to go for the overs. It's a little bit easier to manage, and we like the better matchups versus being negative and trying to sweat it out on the number. We just want to go past our number easily, and that's why we look at the numbers to push above here in the prize picks projections that are available this week. Now, check it out there. You can take advantage of prize picks and do that promo code locked on if you're watching on YouTube, and you'll get a 100% deposit match of up to $100 when you go to prize picks. So check that out as we are making our picks here on the show. All right, Derrick Henry. We love him in DFS this week. 100.5 is his prize picks projection. Let's go over. Let's just do it. I mean, we saw Josh Jacobs, what he did last week. This is Derrick Henry. He's the hammer. Ryan Tannehill is a little bit banged up. They're not going to push the ball too much in the air as much as possible. They're going to pound away. This Texans off defensive line, by the way, Malik Collins could also be out. You have Jonathan Grenard also not playing. He's a very good pass rusher, but also a decent run stopper. So this offensive line of the Titans can just overpower things. So 100.5, it is a high number whenever a running back has 100.5. They're next to it. The 100 yards just don't happen regularly, as we know, but it's Derrick Henry. He hammers this one home. We're going to say he gets at least a 101 rushing yards against the Texans this week. If you want to go a little bit lower, you can look at Raheem Mostert. We talked about him in DFS. 67.5 is his rushing number. So really the only question here is, does Raheem Mostert stay healthy through the entire game? If he does, then you're looking really good here because he'll push that. I mean, the Lions cannot stop him. The run has been a big weakness for Detroit all season long. And they'll probably play a little bit of a zone maybe than usual then to protect against his big plays. That should open up running lanes even more to Mostert there this week. Another number I like is 57.5 here for Gabe Davis, your Bills wide receiver. Last week, we had a combination of Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel do some things there well against his Packers secondary. And you figure that Jair Alexander is going to be more on Stephon Diggs. So there's going to be more balls going in the direction of Gabe Davis. He's a big play guy, so he can get there 2 or 3 catches. And then 57.5. So I'm going there. Now let's introduce a lower end receiving number. Terrace Marshall Jr. of the Panthers, 25.5 is the number. I think he can get 26 receiving yards. He's getting more and more run here. Laviska Shenault still betting a hamstring injury. Shi Smith is not incorporated as much. Marshall getting more run here without Robbie Anderson. So 25.5. And Marshall's a good enough playmaker out of LSU, kind of that lost guy in that Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson realm that still needs to be unlocked a little bit in the NFL. Not clearly as good as either one of those guys, or he was playing a lot for the Panthers, but 25.5 is what we're going for. And I thought this number's low is 70.5 for DeAndre and New Hopkins against the Vikings. This is just too low to me. The way he's getting targeted insanely, I don't think that'll slow down from Kyler Murray. Cardinals secondary again, Viking secondary. Patrick Peterson used to be in the Cardinals secondary. Corner, yeah, he's a little bit slower as well. So Hopkins, veteran on veteran, can do some damage there as well as on camera dance order. So 70.5 there. So 100.5 for Derrick Henry. We're going above that for price picks. Raheem Mostert, 67.5 is the number we're going above. Gabe Davis, 57.5 for receiving yards. Terrace Marshall Jr. for the Panthers, 25.5. And finally, DeAndre Hopkins here at 70.5. Push this all above those numbers here in week number 8. Can't believe it's week number 8, but it's great. And we are great that you joined us to give us that really good listenership here and watchership if you're out there. And we want to give you the best information possible. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. That same thing goes for Locked On Fantasy Football. You get us everywhere you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube if you're watching on there. Thanks again for joining us. Good luck in all your fantasy football contests, whether it be DFS or season-long results. I know it's big. Week 8 is big to push for the playoffs and the set to run or get our teams turned around here if we've been struggling early in the season. So it's big. Go out there, succeed, use our advice, get our site every week, 5 days a week, injury updates, all that you need to dominate your leagues. We're going to bring it to you all throughout the second half of this 2022 NFL season. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this is Vinnie Iyer. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the games, enjoy the results, and we'll catch you Monday for the reactions for all our wins.